for April 25th. This is an informal public workshop where a quorum of the State Water Board may be present, but the State Water Board will not take a formal action. Next slide, please. So to kick us off, I will quickly go over some of our meeting logistics. This meeting, as you may have noticed, is being recorded, and we will be posting the recording on the Shasta Drought website as soon as possible after the meeting ends, likely at the end of the week. So please check if your screen name is reflecting your first and last name, especially if you plan on providing a public comment later today. We will have time for public comments after the staff presentations, and you can provide your comments either verbally during this meeting or in writing via email. And we will be going over more specifically how to do those things when we get to that agenda item. Next slide, please. So I want to recognize, and we want to recognize that what we're discussing today is important and impactful. And we recognize how personal and emotional this can be. And we want to create a space where everyone can share their input on the topic respectfully and be heard and respected. And so to help us accomplish this, we have some ground rules for today's meeting. The first is that this is a public discussion, not a debate. The purpose is not to win an argument, but to hear and respect the perspectives and ideas that are shared today. The second is to listen actively and with an open mind. We can better understand each other's perspectives when we try and see things from their lens. And we can respect another person's point of view without agreeing with them. The third is to stay on point and on time. We do have limited time today, about 2 hours total. So please keep your comments brief and to the point so that everyone has an opportunity to speak. We highly encourage specific comments that will help inform potential updates to the draft regulation. And in addition to suggesting changes, we would like to hear what elements of the regulation you would like to ensure are kept. Next slide, please. Okay, as mentioned, our purpose here is to basically share information, but really to listen and collect comments from you all. We will, collect input and comments and likely not respond to questions at this time. But if you do have any questions, please email us at scottshastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov. So first, we will start off with a presentation from Anne-Marie Orr with the State Water Board's Division of Water Rights. We'll talk about conceptual potential updates to the drought emergency regulations. Following Anne-Marie's presentation, we'll hear from Joe Coteau with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on their recommendations. And after the staff presentations, we will open the floor to public comments and adjourn by 4 p.m. And with that, I would like to introduce and pass it on to Anne-Marie.
Great, thanks, gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Anne-Marie Orr, and I work for the State Water Resources Control Board in the Water Quality Certification and Public Trust section. Our main purpose for holding this meeting today in advance of readopting the emergency regulation is to get your feedback on what has worked and is working with the emergency reg, as well as any changes or updates you would like to propose. Before we get into that portion of the meeting, we will share our thoughts at a conceptual level for updates that we'd like to propose, and then we'll hear from CDFW regarding their recommendations. We will also provide information on our timeline and how to stay engaged and participate throughout this whole process. Next slide. Here's a photo of the Scott River from September 2021. Last year was officially proclaimed by the governor to be a drought emergency for Siskiyou County in May of 2021. So we've officially been experiencing drought conditions for a year now, and unfortunately, there doesn't appear to be any relief in sight. Next slide, please. This graphic from the US Drought Monitor shows that as of April 28th of this year, all of Siskiyou County, shown by the black pin in the center of this map, is in severe drought, and portions of the county are in extreme drought. Next slide. This slide compares the snow water content measured in inches at Middle Boulder 3, which is represented by the two blue lines, and Scott Mountain CDEC stations, which is represented by the orange lines. This graphic compares the daily measurements shown by the solid lines with the historic average levels that are the dashed lines. In the Scott River watershed, snow water content is significantly less than the historical average, and the most recent measurements are at 0. And while I don't have a comparable figure for the Shasta River watershed, the Shasta Trinity National Forest surveys at the end of March and beginning of April 2022 showed snowpack on Mount Shasta to be well below historic averages. Next slide. Board staff have not developed updated regulation language for these conceptual ideas. Rather, staff have developed some potential conceptual updates to the regulation that we will share with you today. As noted earlier, we're hoping to receive feedback on these concepts, as well as other potential updates to the regulation. Board staff propose to include updates to the flows as recommended by CDFW, and Joe Cruteau will discuss CDFW's specific proposed updates later in this presentation. Board staff are also proposing potential updates to local cooperative solutions and the inefficient livestock watering prohibition. And finally, we're also proposing some minor updates to clarify portions of the regulation and add definitions for de minimis groundwater users and coordinating entities. Next slide. First, as a little background, local cooperative solutions may be proposed to the Water Board as a means to meet drought emergency minimum flows or to provide benefits for anadromous fish that are equal to or greater than the anticipated contribution to protections provided by the flows. Examples of other fishery benefits may include actions which increase cold water refugia, localized fish passage, or red protection. Local cooperative solutions must be approved by the Water Board prior to implementation. We want to emphasize that the regulations allow for voluntary efforts that either meet the flows or where CDFW finds that the actions provide equal or better protections to those provided by the flows. The reason we've included provisions for local cooperative solutions in the regulation is to provide flexibility local communities may be able to identify alternative means to best share limited water based on local information. Existing local cooperative solutions include options at the individual, tributary, and watershed level. Staff are proposing updates to add a new option for inefficient livestock watering, discussed. I'll discuss that on the next slide, as well as remove the 400-acre individual requirement, and rather we're going to make it a watershed-wide requirement, and clarify that the dedicated flows are part of a local cooperative solution from senior rights. I'm sorry, let me back up here. And clarify that the dedicated flows that are part of a local cooperative solution from senior rights are protected from diversion by other water users. Next slide, please. Staff are proposing to add a local cooperative solution option for livestock watering during the prohibition period. This would provide for coordinated diversions during high flow events. It would include all or most diverters at the tributary level. It would avoid impacts to fish, for example, by ensuring redds are not dewatered and fish movement within the system is still possible. and it would include gauging or other monitoring of flows at a tributary scale to ensure high flow events and diversions are monitored. Next slide. Staff are proposing to extend the prohibition on inefficient livestock watering until March 31st. In the existing regulation, it runs through January 31st. It would still maintain the ability to lift the prohibition early with a recommendation from CDFW that there would be no impacts to fish and a finding that the lifting of the prohibition will not result in issuance of curtailments. You may remember that the petition or the prohibition was lifted earlier in the Shasta River watershed than was dictated by the existing regulation because it was lifted on January 21st instead of the 31st. Next slide. Other potential updates include the addition of a definition for de minimis groundwater use, which is less than 2 acre-feet per year for domestic use. This definition is consistent with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We also want to take this opportunity to clarify the definition of cooperating entity, to specify that entity does not mean an individual and that the entity must have relevant experience. Next slide. Our anticipated next steps include reviewing feedback from this meeting and developing proposed regulation updates to be released the week of May 16th. We'll hold another public meeting on the draft regulation on May 25th to provide an overview of the proposed updates and receive more feedback. Then during the week of June 6th, we'll release a notice of proposed rulemaking, including the final proposed regulation and an informative digest. The board meeting at which the board members will consider readoption of the regulation is scheduled for June 21st. And now I will turn over the presentation to Joe Croteau.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Just a sound check. Jenilyn, can you hear and see me okay?
Can. Thank you, Joe.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Croteau. We first want to thank the State Water Board for accepting and considering our request to readopt the drought emergency regulations on the Scott and Shasta rivers and for fitting us into this workshop and presentation. We also want to thank staff from the State Water Board, tribal council and members, and many of those in the ranching community and other private citizens that have taken the time to offer ideas, suggestions, support, and also thank those that have expressed concerns or frustration about the regulation. I'm a program manager with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and have primary responsibilities for restoration, environmental permitting, drought response, and juvenile salmon monitoring in Siskiyou County. On April 20th, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife transmitted a letter to the State Water Resources Control Board requesting readoption of the drought emergency regulation for an additional 12 months. In that letter, we recommended retaining some existing regulations and adding to or modifying some others. What follows is a very brief outline and overview of our recommendations, and we look forward to your feedback today. Next slide, please. So this slide represents a summary of what we intend to present. It also kind of serves as an outline for me. We have a slide that lists observable benefits from implementing the current regulation. We have four slides to show you some adult and juvenile monitoring estimates compared to previous years. We will then summarize 4 recommendations from our letter we transmitted to the State Water Resources Control Board. These recommendations include adjustments to the Shasta River minimum winter flows, retention of minimum summer flows on both rivers, retention and extension of the inefficient livestock watering prohibition, and a request for expanded coordination in both valleys. Outside of these recommendations, we do not recommend any flow adjustments to drought emergency minimum flows except for spring ramp down and fall ramp up flows on the Shasta River and a summer ramp down in June on the Scott River. Next slide, please. So I did these animations. I probably shouldn't have done that. Please go ahead and hit next. So one of the benefits we've experienced is advanced communication in the community about how persistent drought is affecting fish, tribes, agriculture, and other interested parties has expanded. This has resulted in more information sharing, creative thinking, project development, and funding opportunities in the basin. We have heard from the tribes about how these fish represent tribal trust resources. We have been invited by small and large ranchers to learn about their business models, how irrigation works, and what regulations mean to them. We have also heard from NGOs and private citizens how important it is for them to know that fish can thrive and coexist. Next. Information gathering has been productive. Through this process, we continue to obtain a better understanding of the respective adjudications, how water rights priorities are administered, updating older landowner records, and confirmation of moved, combined, and rotated points of diversion and a distribution of groundwater wells. Next. Local cooperative solutions were included in the existing regulation to balance regulatory and voluntary efforts. Several local cooperative solutions have been developed at an individual level. Many landowners have needed to join other landowners to meet the 400-acre requirement in the regulation. So far, we have 3 coordinating entities that can prepare binding agreements. They include the SWRCB, the Shasta Valley RCD, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next. Between February and April this year, the agencies have installed 2 additional gauges on the Scott River watershed and 4 additional gauges on the Shasta River watershed. We hope these gauges will contribute to further information gathering, effectiveness monitoring, and potentially more strategic flow targets. We are also starting the process of installing additional temperature monitoring stations in both watersheds. Next. The last on our list here is resolution number 6. Was included in the regulation to encourage the agencies to continue evaluating minimum flow requirements and provide a pathway for adjustments. So far, there have been 2 flow adjustments made on the Shasta River. It also supports our current readoption of the recommendations presented here. And we really hope this resolution is retained. I can't imagine it won't be. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next 4 slides display adult and juvenile salmon numbers from this and previous years. It's important to note that we track Coho salmon and Chinook salmon differently, which is why the graphs are different, and we'll be talking about them differently. This first slide displays adult salmon numbers on the Scott River. And I'll spend more time explaining this one because the other ones will be similar. The top figure is for Coho salmon on the Scott River. This year, in this last fall, we had an adult return of 947. I apologize if you can't see the numbers very well. The same cohort or brood year from 2018 was 727. So those are both are displayed in red. We refer to them as cohorts or brood years because they have very consistent life history, over summering 1 year before going to the ocean, then coming back at year 3. We've color coded the cohorts to show you the last 5 generations of each one. The cohorts displayed by blue and red have been steadily increasing. Credit should be given to all those in and around the community that have been made recovery of this species a commitment through restoration and efficiency actions. The cohort displayed by black demonstrates that the Scott River has the capacity to support even larger numbers of adults spawning coho. The reason we remain concerned in the drought years is also evident by what you see in the black cohort. Recall that the drought years in 2014 and 2015, you can see that the following time they returned, we lost almost 90% of that cohort in 2016, from 2013 to 2016. That cohort is now making a comeback, but you can see that without a drought response, we can set all that hard work in the community back by several generations. For this reason, coho salmon and Scott remain a moderate extinction risk and deserve to be treated as such. So the lower figure is for Chinook salmon on the Scott River. This year we had about 1,300 adult Chinook come back. This time last year we had about 855. We tend to refer to these adults as returns since most of them leave as juveniles immediately and they spend variable amounts of time in the ocean before returning. We typically compare the numbers to the previous return year. As we noted last year, Chinook salmon are declining in the Scott River faster than the Klamath Basin as a whole. You can see that there are below average returns in 7 straight years and 15 of the last 20 years. This is not a good trend, and what we hope we can all agree to is that avoiding an Endangered Species Act listing for Chinook salmon is a common goal for all of us. We really don't want that to happen. Next slide, please. The top figure here represents the most recent juvenile coho salmon outmigration on the Scott River. The light blue fill represents the historical range and timing. The dashed lines represent the historical mean and medians. The black line represents this year's 1+ juvenile coho outmigration. So far this year, we've seen about 39,000 of them outmigrating. The 2022 juvenile estimates look promising. They are likely going to plateau somewhere between the mean and historical maximum. This information is super important because it represents reproduction from the 2020 cohort or brood year that was not able to navigate to spawning habitat until very late in that migration season. So this is a positive thing. This year's juvenile Chinook salmon in the lower figure is on track to be at slightly above the historical average. Estimates of the 0+ outmigration is about 333,000. Precipitation events in October and December with subsequent snowmelt appear to have partially mitigated the long dry spells this winter and spring. Limited groundwater monitoring in the lower Scott Valley indicates that the water table in late summer was shallower in 2021 compared to 2020, which likely supported flow recovery when precipitation started. Next slide. Okay. I'm trying to make sure I keep track here. Moving over to the Shasta River, we can take a look at the coho salmon numbers in the top figure. This year, we had about 53 adults return. If you compare that to the red brood year or cohort from 2018, you'll see that we had 39. Last year, we presented the concept or discussed the extension vortex, where small populations are subject to poor genetic diversity and one bad year away from being functionally extinct. When you look at these numbers and how low they are, we think we are flirting with a coho salmon extinction in the Shasta River if we don't take care of them in these drought years. The lower figure displays Shasta River numbers for adult Chinook salmon. This year, we got about 6,900 compared to 4,100 last year. This last year return was slightly above the average and better than the previous 2 years. You can see that we had long-term lower than average returns with a recent positive trend about 10 years ago. But the long-term trends are still precarious, and we want to take care of our Chinook and the Shasta too. Next slide, please. As shown with the Shasta River adult salmon, the juvenile salmon numbers appear to be hovering around average numbers and below historical maximums. Estimated coho 1+ outmigration is currently around 1,800. Estimated Chinook 0 outmigration is approximately 1.3 million. What you're seeing here is a outmigration similar to the recent past, which indicates that the respective cohorts and returns are going to be similar in the low numbers, especially for coho salmon in the coming years. We'll see how the Chinook do. Next slide, please. So here we are quickly summarizing why we recommend an adjusted minimum winter flow in the Shasta River. The flow habitat results from the 3 sites in McBain and Trush 2014 were composited to calculate spawning habitat availability during a critically dry water year in the winter flow scenario in the Shasta River. The overall flow habitat relationships displayed a relative peak of spawning habitat at 125 CFS in a critically dry water year. We made some ramp ups and ramp downs to minimize superimposition of reds. And we discussed a little bit in our letter about what it means for a red dewatering, tail spill, and red depths, and the fact that having water on top of them alone doesn't mean that they will survive if water drops out on them. Next slide, please. The next recommendation we made was retaining minimum summer flows. Actually, it wasn't a recommendation. It was more of a request to retain these. It is important to consider steelhead also in the context of the governor's drought proclamation as a tribal trust resource and as an ecological indicator of available year-round rearing habitat. And it's still based on the best available information that we have. The second bullet, we think, well, summer flows support steelhead. They support stream function by moving material, and they maintain a minimum flow to support full migration when precipitation occurs. And then flow values are intended to minimize lethal water quality conditions. Lower minimum summer flows appear incapable of avoiding lethal water quality conditions in some locations. Next slide, please. So in this we recommended retaining and actually extending the inefficient livestock watering to March 31st. The primary reason we support this prohibition and extension is because the existing drought emergency rate of minimum flows do not represent adequate flows for all salmon and steelhead life history needs. The minimum flows only provide rock bottom migration flows, and so we're attempting to keep water in stream for fish where appropriate. To be clear, we do not have an issue with efficient livestock watering. There are already some installations in place and funding is available to install more in the basin. We also noted that there are potential unintended consequences with lifting inefficient livestock watering over a 24-hour period while salmon eggs are incubating and hatching. A red that is still wet but has lowered water quality issues will likely perish. The existing regulation allows us to implement their prohibition on a case-by-case basis and apply some performance standards. And the third bullet, we would like to learn more about the contribution of unlined ditch contribution to groundwater recharge and how water is later distributed to the river critical periods. During critical periods, we can permit groundwater projects that include monitoring to track low contributions to flow contributions to the river. And then lastly, let's not forget about that our rivers and tributaries have the capacity to recharge groundwater too. I added the little box with some notes here about what a cubic foot per second is so that people can, a lot of people that I've talked to don't know how much water that really means. And so if you look at this and you see that we're diverting even 1 CFS equals almost 2 acre feet per day. If someone is diverting 5 CFS, that's 3.2 million gallons per day or almost 10 acre feet per day. 10 CFS is equivalent to about 6.4 million gallons or almost 20 acre feet per day. So we're just outlining here or highlighting here how much water is being diverted for how much might actually being used for livestock. There might be other ways. We think there's other ways to contribute to groundwater and monitor it. Next slide, please. Go ahead and hit next. We had a recommendation for advanced coordination. The focus of this recommendation is on critically needed local coordination. Over the course of the last year, we have come to miss some of the coordination that was occurring about a decade ago and come to realize more community coordination is critically needed. Next bullet. A community-based coordination group with local subject matter expertise might be even better than what we're doing now. A community-based group would need to include coordinate with a state water board, the tribes, fish agencies, the Water Master District, and the GSA. And I had some notes about including state agencies in the coordination and local cooperative solutions. And you saw in previous slides that Anne-Marie brought up that was discussed and it will be open for discussion. We hope to hear more from participants today about that. Next slide. We're going to close by emphasizing the importance of balancing the interests of all people. The future of tribal, agricultural, and biological resources will depend on our collective long-term commitment and efforts. The 2004 recovery strategy for California coho salmon recognized this, and it holds true for all the resources that we're working on and talking about today. So with that, that's my last sort of slide with notes and information. If you want to go ahead and hit next, I'm done with my part of the presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so thank you, Joe, and thank you, Anne-Marie, for your presentations. We'll now transition into the public comment portion of today's meeting. But first, I just want to, quickly just reiterate our ground rules for today. we recognize the importance and the impact that this has on folks, and we want to create a safe space where everyone can speak and be heard respectfully. So the first is that this is a public discussion, not a debate. Listen actively and with an open mind. We can respect others' opinions without agreeing with them. The third is staying on point and on time. Please keep your comments brief and to the point so that everyone has an opportunity to provide a comment. If you agree with the prior speaker, feel free to reference your support for that comment rather than repeating it entirely. And again, we highly encourage specific comments that will inform potential updates to the regulation. And we would also like to hear what elements of the regulation that you would like to ensure are kept or not changed. Next slide, please. So how to participate. So there are a couple of ways to participate today. You can provide a verbal comment during today's meeting, or you can email us your written comments. You may have noticed that the chat feature has been disabled. This is to kind of just direct all written comments to our Scott Shasta Drought at waterboards.ca.gov inbox. If you would like to provide a comment verbally, you can click raise hand on your taskbar to be placed in the speaker queue. I see that folks are doing so already. So each commenter will have 3 minutes to provide a comment. And at the end of the 3 minutes, I will ask you to either complete your comment via email or wait to the end. And if we have any additional time after everyone has provided a comment, we can revisit folks that either ran out of time and would like to finish their comment verbally, or folks have another comment that they would like to make. We can do so if there is additional time at the end. So in terms of the order, we will be accepting comments from tribal leaders and elected officials first. So I noticed that folks have raised their hands, and so I'm going to quickly try and jot down the order that I see it in, but I will ask folks to lower their hands if you are not a leader of a tribe or an elected official. Thank you. Okay. With that, I also noticed that we have a handful of telephone callers. So if you are joining this meeting via phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And then when I call on your name and it's your turn to provide your comment, you can press *6 to unmute. You should receive a little prompt when to do so. Okay. So as mentioned, our purpose for this meeting is to receive comments on the draft regulations. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at that Scott Shasta Drought at waterboards.ca.gov email address. And with that, I am going to open up the floor if there are any leaders of tribes that would like to provide a comment. Please raise your hand. And if you're not a tribal leader, please lower your hand. So this could be honorable chairpersons, vice chairpersons, or council members. Okay, I see Michael Belchick.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Obviously, I'm not a tribal chairperson or elected official. Vice chairman will be coming on at 3 o'clock, and I just wanted to let you know that we had arranged for a time for him to come on then.
Yeah, thank you for that heads up, Michael. And I'll look out for Vice Chair Frankie Myers. And as soon as I see him, I'll ask him to provide his comment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any elected officials So please raise your hand. Okay. Okay. With that, I'll ask if we could stop sharing the PowerPoint and start sharing our timer. Okay, thank you. So at this time, if you have any comments that you would like to make, please raise your hand. If you're calling in by phone, you could press *9. Keep your hand raised, please, until you provide your comment. I will announce your name, give you permission to mute yourself, and after you provide your comment, please lower your hand and mute yourself. Okay, so I think, based off of what we had before, I'll start with Theodora and then go in order based off of the folks that have their hand raised. So Theodora, I'm giving you permission to unmute yourself to provide your comment.
Hello, my name is Theodora Johnson. I'm a 6th generation Scott Valley rancher raising my kids here on our cow-calf operation. I'm speaking on behalf of the Scott Valley Agriculture Water Alliance, AGWA, which is a new communication group speaking for our local hay growers, cow-calf operations, and our 2 organic dairies. Our goal is to spread accurate information about our valley's ag producers, the Scott River, and its fish. The board's handling of our water rights in this emergency situation poses an existential threat to our community, where multi-generational family farms and ranches are the fabric of our community. Almost every local business depends on us. So a lot of wildlife depend on the open spaces we provide here too. And we go to great pains here in Scott Valley to be good stewards, and it shows. We passed our own Scott Valley plan back in 1980 to keep our spaces open and not developed. Our aquifer is stable here, and our Coho, Chinook, and steelhead populations are healthy as well. And a lot of conservation efforts by our farmers and ranchers have helped make that happen. And it's also obvious that the flow levels being asked for in these regulations are not a bare minimum. They're an ideal flow level because we haven't met those levels in 9 out of the past 11 years, and the fish are still doing fine. The current regulations are unsustainable for us, even when considering the 30% reduction plans. I want to mention that any allusion to these plans as voluntary is completely false. They are being done only because the other alternative is 100% loss of our water and therefore our businesses, and we can't survive long at 70% production. There's a huge number of irrigated acres in Scott Valley that are surface irrigated and don't even qualify for the LCS plans. Right now, we're looking at about 50% of the irrigated acreage that could be fallowed because they either don't qualify or haven't submitted an LCS plan. A lot of that is pasture, which means our cattle growers are in big trouble. Add to that the inefficient livestock watering provision, which doesn't just make watering our cattle extremely difficult in some places, but it also does away with the valuable aquifer recharge that ditches provide. This prohibition certainly shouldn't be extended to March 31st because winter recharge is very important, and CDFW needs to give us site-specific evidence of where the salmon are spawning in the main stem and the tributaries, not just give us blanket prohibitions like this one. I want to shed some light on the cow-calf business. It's definitely a long game. It's not a place to make a quick buck. It takes 2 years to raise a heifer that will give you a calf and a year to raise that calf and sell it. The genetics of your herd are something you work on for decades or more. If you have to sell your seed stock when they are still productive mother cows, which is usually for about 12 years, you have lost something so valuable that it's hard to calculate. You invest feed, vaccine, equipment, and your time year-round to keep this cow. If you can't irrigate pasture to keep this mother cow herd intact, you can't just replace that cow you sold. This business is handed down from generation to generation.
Thank you, Theodora. 3 minutes is up, but we welcome you, to finish your comments either through email and emailing us at scottshasta@waterboards.ca.gov, or after everyone has provided a comment, we can return it to you. So I'll make a note and call on you then. Up next, we have Conrad Fisher. So Conrad, you should have permissions to speak.
I think I unmuted. Am I here?
You are. Thank you.
Hi, Conrad with Water Climate Trust. I just wanted to reiterate what the chairman of the water board said at a previous water board meeting, which was expressing gratitude to all of the staff at the water board and CDFW who made the initial in-stream flow emergency requirement happen. So thank you all for making it happen. And I would like to express support for a second year. And as importantly, I would encourage CDFW and the water board to take steps toward establishing, recommending, and requiring permanent in-stream flows that are consistent with existing laws. I'm just going to rattle off 5 different things, all of which require, cannot be implemented without an in-stream flow recommendation and requirement that is consistent with law. The first is SGMA. SGMA implementation in the Scott and Shasta is a mess, in large part because California has not yet said how much water fish need. Similarly, the water rights response to climate change, which was amazing. It gave one of the best methodologies for accounting for water rights and water allocation. And 1/3 of that, it was about supply and demand. And part of the demand was demand from existing water rights. And another part was demand for in-stream needs. That has not been done. So despite this mandate for climate change, it has not been done yet. And then the water board also has a racial equity action plan. Again, you water board cannot accomplish the letter and intent of your racial equity action plan unless and until you establish in-stream flow requirements consistent with recovery. California Water Action Plan, that's number 4, requires an in-stream flow recommendation and requirement on the Shasta. That has not been done. I believe it's because CDFW is pursuing a safe harbor agreement, and again, safe harbor is the 5th process that cannot be effectively implemented without in-stream flow requirements. So these are just 5 of many processes, none of which can be done properly without a permanent in-stream flow requirement. And to the ag community, I do want to express compassion. Our government gave away too much water over the last century, gave away rights to too much water, and people are hurting. And one of the best ways to get out of this with the least amount of pain is to make the most of public money that is already being spent. I'm not saying it's a cure-all, but there are things we have not yet done. One is to ensure that when public money is allocated, it does not result in less water for fish. A lot of times water conservation money results in less water for fish. Let's stop doing that. When there is conserved water, let's actually allocate it to the fish so that when taxpayer money is spent for the purpose of helping fish, it actually helps fish and alleviates pressure on ag. And finally, measure the impact. We do not collect data necessary to determine the impact on in-stream flows of public money that's spent. So thank you everyone for your time. And I hope I didn't say too much. Thanks.
Thank you, Conrad. Right on time. Up next, we have Nick Joslin, followed by Elisa Noble, and then Gareth Plank. Apologies. And if I mispronounce your name, I apologize in advance. Feel free to correct me. So Nick Joslin, you should have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Hi, this is Nick Joslin, 5th generation resident in Siskiyou County. I live in Mount Shasta, work for the Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center. I'd like to say thank you for the considerations that were made during this time, where we've seen a historic downward pressure placed on our fisheries and public trust resources. Thank you, Joe, for the current fish count data. Speaking of the curtailments in the Shasta, Coho seemed to have benefited significantly in terms of out-migrant survival, which shows the benefit we gained by protecting flows. And it's pointing towards the need to protect the flows and water quality for juveniles now rearing, waiting to out-migrate next year. The extension of the emergency regulation will do just that. But I'd like to stress that we need better tools to make it easier for resource managers to make good decisions, and I appreciate Department of Fish and Wildlife for recognizing that. Using more gauges in the river will help, and I appreciate Department of Fish and Wildlife for installing more gauging in the Shasta. I believe the SPU gauge, the Grenada Pump Station gauge, should be used. The variability of this gauge is very high. It was 104 CFS on April 23rd. Yesterday, it was 65. The hydrograph shows a massive effect from groundwater users turning on pumps. These users have not been curtailed as they are overlying groundwater users. So to sum it up, no data, no problem is no longer an acceptable way to manage public trust resources. If public funding is used for irrigation projects, the data should be public. We need more granularity in the tools that can be used to assist flow management throughout the river. Just relying on the gauge at the mouth leaves an approximate 12-hour time lag where lethal low water events can occur throughout the river before corrections can be made. Special concern needs to be placed in the cold water reaches of the Shasta River below Juvenile. This all points towards a permanent in-stream flow recommendation needing to be made so that gains we make during these years of emergency regulations are not lost. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nick. Up next, we have Alyssa Noble, then Gareth Plank, and then Lisa Oliver LaRue. So Lisa, I'm giving you permissions to unmute yourself.
Great, can you hear me?
You can.
Excellent. Lisa Noble, Executive Director of the Scott Valley and Shasta Valley Water Master District. We serve about 283 diversion owners with adjudicated rights to 277,000 plus annual acre feet of water from the Shasta River and from the French Creek tributary to the Scott River. As a reminder, the district has a ministerial duty to distribute water in accordance with the decreed priority of water rights. While we do not provide enforcement of the State Water Board's drought regulation, we will continue to coordinate with State Water Board staff to ensure that the decreed priority of water rights is upheld. With regard to flow requirements, we do appreciate the proposed amendments to target flow requirements. We will be involved in collecting some data, happy to continue to help, and would like to see those requirements continue to be refined to account for all stream conditions that help meet the biological needs of fish at strategic times and locations. Inefficient livestock watering provision, we strongly recommend that this be removed. There are many reasons why the apparent goal of this provision does not meet the on-ground reality of the vital need to water livestock. Additionally, fish screens on these ditches require a certain flow level in order to function. If the provision remains, please consult with the state veterinarian to establish the appropriate water demand for different types and classes of livestock. The current number is grossly inaccurate. Local cooperative solutions, we do appreciate this provision and we're certainly seeing it utilized by some water users in the Scott Valley. However, the Shasta Valley presents more of a challenge. LCSs have thus far, these concepts none have proved feasible because of how the priority system of adjudicated surface water rights works. The Shasta River Decree prioritizes water rights by the date the water right was claimed. Due to this priority system, any LCS that would provide a curtailment exemption to a lower priority water right would conflict with the decree and would cause harm to all higher priority water rights. This makes it challenging to develop an LCS for surface water, though we remain engaged in those discussions. Additionally, it is unclear if and how groundwater users that impact river flow will be curtailed within the drought regulation, which creates an uncertain playing field for any water users who might be considering a voluntary reduction. And finally, with regard to financial compensation, we will continue to work to identify drought funding to compensate water users who are curtailed and provide financial incentives for voluntary reductions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments today. I am going to amend the list. I do see that we have Vice Chair Frankie Myers with us today. So Vice Chair, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Ayukwi, Nak Now, Frankie Myers, Medj Machuk, Shregon, Tula Creek, Kinnick, and I just wanted to make a few comments here. Thank you for taking this issue to the forefront. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Yurok tribe, with whom we have almost 6,500 members and over 15,000 descendants. This is a critical point in the time of our people, of the river. It's a critical point for our basin. We have been working diligently for millennia to maintain balance within this basin, to ensure our way of existence survives, our way of life thrives. And these are critical moments that we need to look at the scale of what we're doing here in the basin and ensuring every community, from Raqua at the mouth to the headwaters and every tributary in between. For Yurok, we know from our oral traditions and from our history that when there are no longer any fish in the river, there will no longer be a need for Yurok people here to exist. There will be no existence for humanity. We take this piece of traditional knowledge to understand that our rivers and our salmon are keystone life species to the world that we live in. They are an indicator of the health of not only the world, but us as a people. And I can tell you now that time is running out for us, for our way of life, for our existence. We come to make comments not to ensure profitability, but to ensure our existence. These tributaries are critical for Yurok people and for all the indigenous people of the basin. They're critical because they're important to the life cycle of the salmon. Nepui, Chinook, and Coho. When we talk about water rights and we talk about minimum flow requirements, I go back to the original negotiation for water rights within this basin. And the original negotiations were between the sovereign nations of the Klamath Basin, including the Yurok tribe and the federal government. Our negotiations, our water rights, were first negotiated to ensure our way of life throughout the basin, to ensure that the species we depend on. We negotiated that the federal government has a trust responsibility to ensure the survival of our salmon, our nepui, which literally means what we eat, our salmon. We have to think about this ecosystem as a whole in its entirety. And we have to think about how all communities affect the whole. We must look at how surface and groundwater works together. We have been managing this basin for thousands of years, and what we have learned is that all systems work together. They do not work independently. And that is a truth across the board. And it's true here as well. We have to look at what we're taking from the ground as well as what we're taking from the surface. We have to look at it not in the perspective of simply keeping a species alive or keeping a species at the bare minimum of existence, because that's not what the federal government was entrusted to do. They were entrusted to keep them alive so that they're sustainable, so that they're abundant, as they were when we first negotiated our water rights. I understand that as communities, we have to come together. We have to have an understanding that we all have to do our part to ensure that we survive together. We are moving on the world's largest salmon restoration project in our history. From the work we're doing on the Trinity to the dam removal on the Klamath, if we don't engage here in these tributaries, the key portions of what we need for the overall health and well-being of the basin as a whole doesn't work. It all has to come together, and it all has to be beyond the minimum of survival for our Coho. Not just for UROC, but for people, for us as a people. I know that these decisions affect individuals within our sub-basins. I understand that. As a community who has gone through a catastrophic change in our way of life, I tell you, I understand that. But if we can work together, if we can find solutions together so that our existence here in our communities can thrive, that's what we need to do. And in order for our existence to survive, in order for my community to survive here, we need these bare minimums. We have to have them. We don't have a bumper crop of salmon left. We don't have an ability to move somewhere else. This is our place. This is our home. This is our economy. This is our religion. This is our church. This is who we are. I ask that you take my comments to heart, that you continue to move forward with the adoption of the drought emergency regulations, and you think about strengthening them and including a holistic plan to move forward so that we could all move forward together. If we fight for sustainability, we all survive. If we fight individually, we all lose. Whoa, clap. Whoa, clap, whoa, clap. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Myers. I appreciate you coming to provide your comments, and to all of the other folks here today that are providing your comments. Up next, we have Gareth Plank, followed by Lise Oliver LaRue, and then Cecile Willie. So with Gareth, you should have permissions to unmute.
Thank you very much, and Vice Chairman Myers, I appreciate your comments. And my first response is that the tribal rights and the importance of the fishery cannot be overstated. And I think that's something that we all have to understand and recognize the importance of that. And what I think we also have to recognize is that how and the approach of the Water Board and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife might not be the best path. Approximately 10 years ago, my father-in-law and I went to the said Water Board and offered up 10 square miles of ranch and farmland with 5 miles of contiguous river frontage to conduct a study to address just this. We said, we will give you the water when you want it, and you can actually study and monitor because we know you'll be doing this at some point. So let's do the science now. And lo and behold, the Water Board told us to take a hike, and that our generosity as ranchers was left unmet. And here we are today. One of the things I will also share is our ranch has always had an open door policy, and we've often, and not often, we always invite other people to come and show us what we can do better. And there's been a dearth of participants to come out I've offered this up for years, and people really want to tell us what to do more than to come and show us. Moving along, they have a few things that I'm very distressed by. The words collaboration and cooperation ring hollow here. That is not what we're hearing. The disaster of one size fits all, no accommodation for what these reaches are like, is very distressing. Looking at different water rights, which wells have gone in after the adjudication, and treating all participants equally leaves a very sour taste in the folks that want to participate within this. Looking out at the unintended consequences of what you're doing, you basically are the handmaidens of get big or get out. The large ranchers will succeed. The smaller operations will fail under this. They don't have the resources to accommodate it. The other thing I'd like to address is Vice Chairman Meyer said there are, or actually I believe it's Conrad Fisher said, there's lots of resources available. The removal of the dams are incredibly important to these tributaries. Their importance is accelerated because of that. We should be getting cooperation. We should be having Fish and Wildlife coming in here, helping us develop plans instead of saying with bullets and bayonets, come and do it or suffer the consequences. I would implore you all to read Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. What happens when individuals feel they don't have a voice? They look for a strong man to come and remedy it. So I definitely suggest get away from the bullets and bayonets. $6.5 trillion in the Middle East and 20 years of warfare didn't do it. You're not going to return fish with bayonets in this these communities as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth. Up next, we have Cecile Willie, followed by Glenn Spain, and then Regina Chicazola. So Cecile, you should have permission to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay.
I'm Cecile Willie. I'm the staff attorney with Save California Salmon, and I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to comment on the readoption of these regulations. I support the plan to set minimum water flows for the Scott and Shasta rivers to protect fish populations. The Scott and Shasta rivers are top salmon producing tributaries to the Klamath, and the Klamath has been extremely low and hot these last couple of years, which has created poor habitat conditions for salmon. And this action must be taken to help regulate flows and in turn improve the water quality. The minimum flows are needed for Shasta River, where normally juvenile salmon would follow the cold high flows from late spring, early summer runoff, which is where we are now, all the way to the ocean. Additionally, young first-year coho need to stay in cold fresh water throughout the summer to survive. On the Scott River, which is the top producer of endangered coho salmon in the Klamath, it's dewatered in most years by surface water diversions and groundwater pumping. Thankfully, California Fish and Wildlife has made some recommendations, which some beneficial changes with regards to diversions and groundwater use that would help maintain the needed minimum flows to help all life stages of salmon to survive in this current dry period. The curtailment orders worked last year, and a quick action is needed now to enact effective curtailments this year. The fish cannot wait any longer. The emergency regulations must be enforced, and the river flow and fish health must be properly monitored. Again, I support the plan to set minimum water flows, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cecile. Up next, we have Glenn Spain. So Glenn, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
There, can you hear me?
Okay.
My name is Glenn Spain. I'm the Northwest Regional Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. We're commercial fishing folks, family fishermen and family operated and owned businesses up and down the coast. Our crop are salmon, and our crop has been in a disaster state for many, many years. That has cost us thousands of jobs, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of lost income and lost availability of harvest, simply because we're modeled by or controlled by weak stock management. That means the weakest stock in the Pacific coast, when it intermingles with stronger stocks, we're pulled off the water. We can't catch anything. Yet again, the entire Northern California fishery, which is one of our traditional very large fisheries, is closed because of weak stocks in the Klamath, and those are particularly exacerbated in the Scott and Shasta. The Scott and Shasta are the best stocks we have for coho right now. They are facing extinction. Every other stock is facing extinction. The trend is down. We haven't been able to harvest coho salmon since the 1990s at all, long before they were ESA listed, but they are ESA listed. And the populations today are only very small fractions of their historic numbers, very small fractions, on the order of 2%. The depressed stocks in the Scott particularly are distressing. They have created or exacerbate the problems throughout, and we're also monitored so that even if we are in the possibility or accidentally catching some of these stocks, our harvests on all other stocks, including hatchery stocks, are severely limited. These are not optional flows. These are not optimal flows. And I want to quote from the department's letter, April 20th, that is the underpinnings of this regulation. These flows, quote, are not intended to set the stage for long-term management considerations, nor should they be construed to provide adequate protections for salmonids over extended periods of time. They only provide drought emergency minimum flow recommendations for all life stages during the current drought emergency. We support the recommendations of the department. We also support the transition, the funding and financial mechanisms for those who are suffering for the transition to a more sustainable water system. Those funds are available. We support those programs as well.
Thank you, Glenn. Up next, we have Regina Chiquizola, followed by we have a telephone caller number ending in 402. And then Theodore, I do see you in the queue. I am going to just ask you to hang on tight until we get through all of the folks that have not yet provided their comment. So Regina, you should be able to unmute.
Okay, I am unmuted. I did want to mention that I got a message from Lise Oliver that they were skipped and they are a local person. So I just wanted to mention that so you know, so they can get back on the queue. But my name is Regina Chiquizola and I'm calling today to express that I do support curtailments in the Scott and Shasta River. I feel like hearing something said like we are one bad year away from having coho go extinct in the Shasta River shows the direness of the situation. But I also wanted to say that I've seen these rivers almost go dry even when it's not a bad year because of uncoordinated water diversions and also because of water being used in a way that is not sustainable and is not in the beneficial use of the people of California. So I support there being a long-term plan for in-stream flows that happen so that we know what the flows need to be every year and people can also know how much water they're going to get every year instead of hearing about it so close to the planting season. And that is the way it is in a lot of other watersheds. People know what to expect early on instead of because we know what the in-stream flows are going to be and it helps for planning. And I'm sure some people disagree, but that's all right. A lot of people do disagree. I also wanted to really say that I think it's critically important that we deal with groundwater withdrawals. There's been a lot of science to show how interconnected the groundwater is with the surface water within these watersheds, especially within the Scott River, but in the Shasta River, because it is a cold spring fed watershed, I think it's safe to say that there's the same kind of situations going on in parts of it. I think that it's critically important also to look at enforcement. It's been mentioned here that some people are really trying and are trying to do the right things and that this is being felt in different ways for big farmers versus small farmers. And I think that looking at enforcement is a way to show that the people who don't listen to the curtailments and are going to have to deal with it, whereas the people who are trying to be good players should be rewarded. Also, I think that this situation also shows that we need to look at the water rights system within the state. It was created a long time ago and it's no longer functional, and it really rewards big landowners over small farmers. With all that said, I think that we also need to do better at measuring who's using water where, so we can try to think of permanent solutions. And I think that's what I really want to focus on, is that we need a permanent solution to this problem, because this is hurting everyone, the tribes, the farmers, but especially the fish. So thank you so much. I do support this emergency plan right now and hope to be involved in any long-term planning, and also echo what a lot of the other people that support the curtailment say also. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina, for your comments, and also for flagging that Lise was skipped. I do apologize. I am going in the order in which people's hands are raised in Zoom. So if I'm not sure what had happened, but I was curious if Lise had left or not. So with that, I'm going to go to Lise Oliver LaRue. So Lise, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, hello, Ayuki, thank you. My connection had gotten messed up during the previous speaker, and all of my audio went out, so I had to rejoin. And again, thank you to Regina for flagging that. I know the technology can be pesky, but I do appreciate the advocating for me in that. Hello, Ayuki. My name is Lise Oliver. I am a Karuk tribal member and a youth currently living in Siskiyou County. I've been born and raised here and have lived on the Shasta, the Scott River, the Sacramento River, and the Klamath, all at different times of my life. And I'm currently a graduate student at Oregon State University and also working as a rural community organizer for Save the California Salmon, and just really wanting to echo different concerns that folks have had for the rural communities here. Thinking about tribal communities and also smaller farmers who are heavily impacted by these regulations that larger stakeholders and folks with more capital can basically buy themselves out of. We really do need to work for longer solutions about how we're going to manage the water systems in ways that are actually advocating for the fish, advocating for tribal members, advocating for rural farmers, and not setting up those communities to have instances where we've seen where blame is put on tribal communities for the impacts, when this is a larger problem of the United States government overpromising the water that is available originally, and then also continuing that legacy through mismanagement and through just not having as much ways that we can come into community to solve these issues without it being only in conflict. I want to advocate for the fact that the fish are our relatives, and we're literally seeing our youth, our people, the fish are our relatives and our people too, dying in front of us, and that impacts everyone who's involved, including folks who have come to these lands because of the plentiful fish and the spaces that we've been able to create through reciprocity. So I'm in support of the curtailments currently, and I really do want to echo, as Regina mentioned, that we need longer term solutions, because it means that everyone is hurting, and it means that we're literally losing entire species potentially because of the decisions that are being made, and just echoing that we really need some urgency there in protecting the youth, and that includes our fish youth too. Thank you, Yupa.
Thank you, Lise Oliver LaRue, and I'm glad you were able to reconnect. So up next, we have a caller phone number ending in 402, followed by Nat Kane, and then a caller with the phone number ending 081. So caller ending in 402, you should be able to unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Warren Farnham, and I'm an agricultural producer and landowner in Scott Valley. Had family there for multiple generations, and I'm going to condense some of these comments and not the validity of the curtailments or such, but I would like to expand probably on one area due to a 3-minute time frame that Mr. Coho and Ms. Johnson briefly stated, and it had to do with the stockwater issue. The stockwater open ditch restriction and a proposed expansion of this restriction from CDFW will ultimately decrease in-stream flows when they are needed most, and that would be late in the summer. So moving forward, let's look at this restriction logically with the information we have. If a tributary has made connectivity to the river and the Fort Jones gauging station, CDFW flows are met, the active diversion of surface water during the winter months for stockwater is your best and currently the only option that will allow water banking outside the regular surface water irrigation diversion, outside of natural precipitation, of course. Most stockwater diversion occurs in the winter months and is on the west side of the valley. The Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index, SWRCB, which was developed by the UC Davis, supports and identifies this area as the most efficient for groundwater recharge and banking in the valley. Add to the fact that these areas of recharge are miles from the river, in some cases, the release of banked water will be months away, thus having a likely potential to positively impact in-stream flows later in the summer when they are needed most. To loosely quantify this potential water banking, the math is simple. For example, if winter stockwater diverters on the west side of the valley cumulatively divert 50 CFS daily, this would amount to 100 acre-feet a day or 3,000 acre-feet per month or 9,000 acre-feet in a 3-month stockwater timeframe. Is this significant? Absolutely. The recent Scott Valley Groundwater Sustainability Plan has a groundwater use for the whole valley set at an average of 42,000 acre-feet per year. The loosely calculated recharge from stockwater diversion alone in open ditches offsets this use by 21%. Is this a linear relationship? No, but it demonstrates the positive potential of winter stockwater diversion in open ditches. No other recharge banking option is available at this time or has the potential to improve in-stream flows later in the summer. To summarize, the recharge numbers could be further defined and quantified, modeled and supported by better data, but the positive action of winter stockwater diversion from an open ditch when ET is lowest, the location for recharge is most efficient, release of banked water is better time, all while set flows are being met with fish is undeniable. Further restricting or reducing stockwater diversion will only hurt in-stream flows later in the season when needed most. I would recommend amending the early regulation restrictions on stockwater diversion in open ditches and align the use of stockwater from open ditches to after the first season flush and flows being met at the gauging station. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Warren. Next, we have Nat Kane, followed by number ending in 081, and then Angelina Cook, sorry. And then Theodore, I do see your hand, and we'll ask you to just hang in there, and we'll return to you if there is time at the end. So Nat.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathaniel Kane with Environmental Law Foundation. I just have a few points that I'd like to respond to that were made by some other commenters. One point that is out there is the idea that the fish don't actually spawn or rear in the main stem of the Scott and Shasta. I think this point sort of misses the point, which is that in most years, including the most normal years, there simply isn't water in the main stems of the Scott and Shasta. And that's the reason there's no fish there. And I think that these flow regulations are really important to address that issue. And the same goes for shade and habitat issues in those rivers. And I think we need to make sure that in addition to flows, we're making sure that the temperature TMDLs are being followed in both of these rivers. I also want to push back on the idea that fish populations are doing okay in the Scott and Shasta. I think that's just not true. I think if we look at the presentation that Mr. Croteau did earlier, 1 out of 3 Coho cohorts is in real trouble. The other 2 are doing slightly better in the last couple of years, but on a longer term scale are in quite a bit of trouble. And Chinook and the Scott are not looking good at all over the last 10 or so years. So I think that the argument that the populations are doing good is based on really starting the clock on that narrative quite recently. And then a few other points. There are benefits to flows in the main stems beyond spawning and rearing there. There's benefits to the downstream reaches, to the canyon reach and the Scott, and also to temperatures and water quality and overall stream function, and also to faster stream recovery in the fall when we do get precipitation. And lastly, I think that the data that's being generated from this program is vital. I would like to see the state board do more. I know they've been doing a lot and I appreciate the efforts that have been made, but I would like to see more presentation of the data that's been collected, make it available, and let's use this data to make this regulation better for the future. And my final point that I already sort of mentioned is, in normal years, these rivers are not hitting the flow minimums. And I really hope that this program, these emergency regs, form the basis for permanent in-stream flow protections in the Scott and the Shasta. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nat. Up next, we have a person with phone number ending in 081. You should be able to unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Hi, my name is Lauren Sweezy, and I've lived in Scott Valley, California for 43 years. My family has owned my family farm since 1969, and the family before mine owned the farm since 1867. This information is important for me to tell you. Historically, farming and ranching is part of my family's heritage and culture, as well it is within other families in Scott Valley. Scott Valley is not big ag. Scott Valley Ag is multi-generational, family-owned and operated business for well over a century and a half. If the Water Board is recognizing the importance of heritage and cultures from non-farming and ranching folks, it should also recognize the significance and value of heritage and cultures to farmers and ranchers in Scott Valley. All of us, including the fish, are part of the trust beneficiaries. We must have balance in the public trust. Never should one beneficiary be more important than the next. Before the curtailment, efficient irrigation improvements had already been happening in Scott Valley. Now these water users are being penalized instead of praised. In the current curtailment, we are being asked for an arbitrary 30% reduction in water expectation. The readoption language for the new curtailment must be clear that the 30% reduction in water is compared to the 2020-2021 year as the baseline, not as it is stated the previous year. So in other words, don't add a 30% onto another 30%. Ag operators will definitely not survive here with a 60% reduction in water use. Also, the 30% option is for groundwater use only. In Scott Valley, at least 1/2, that's 50%, irrigated lands are surface water, and once shut off, will be left fallow. The Coho numbers have been going up for the last 2 decades in the Scott River. 2018, 2019 showed excellent Coho returns. Coho are tributary spawners, not mainstream spawners, a fact that is well documented in California Department of Fish and Wildlife's annual Scott Valley salmon studies. Coho do not hang out in the main stem of the Scott River in the summer. The fish don't need the summer minimum flows required by the state. The curtailment is an unfair and unneeded regulation that goes against the State Water Board's vision statement. The statement is, a sustainable California made possible by clean water and water availability for both human use and environmental resource protection. Again, a balanced public trust is what is needed. I encourage everyone to visit the website of Scott Valley Agriculture Water Alliance, agua.org, where accurate facts are gathered from the agencies like CDFW, CSWB, and others, telling the truth about Scott Valley's fish, farming, and ranching. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Up next, we have Angelina Cook, followed by a number ending in 350, and then Craig Tucker. So Angelina, you should be able to unmute.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Angelina Cook, and I have been living in Siskiyou County working towards source water protection and alpine ecosystem restoration for about 15 years. In response to the last commenter and a few of the other ranching comments, I think that the reality is that the curtailment might not be ideal. It seems expensive and a little bit clunky, but it's better than what we had before. So I do totally support the continuation of the drought curtailment in the Shasta and Scott. And I also want to reiterate my general support for establishment of a long-term permanent in-stream flow requirements so that ranchers can know what they're dealing with and we don't have so much back and forth last minute preparations that kind of increase the pain for a lot of water users. I think compared to historic conditions, the fish populations in the Shasta and Scott are clearly not healthy, but effective actions such as the 2021 curtailment can result in positive benefits for fish. Chairman Myers or Vice Chair Myers highlighted that the salmon is a keystone species, which indicates the overall health of the entire ecosystem. So in addition to the extension of the curtailment, I fully support establishment of some type of forum for ongoing productive participation and collaboration between the various interests, including SGMA, IRWIM, the Scott Shasta Water Master, community organizations, and ranchers and farmers and everyone that relies upon reliable sources of water. I think even though, as Gareth Plank mentioned, sometimes the collaborative efforts have created more confusion than cohesion, but in the end, they are required to improve understanding and respect for tribal rights, the rights of nature, as well as dispel the false narrative that continues to pit fish against farms. So in summary, I believe that a permanent in-stream flow threshold along with coordinated community ongoing approach is the most cost-effective way to move away from our current expensive over-allocated system to a system of government that provides stability for family farmers and protects the public trust.
Thank you, Angelina. Up next, we have Craig Tucker, followed by Sari Summerstrom, and then Dave Webb. So Craig, you should be able to unmute.
Hey, this is Craig Tucker. I'm the Natural Resources Policy Advocate for the Karuk Tribe. Appreciate you having the meeting, giving everybody an opportunity to talk. Last year, the Karuk Tribe published a study titled Assessment of the Scott River Salmon Performance under Historical, Current, and Restoration Scenarios. It's basically an analysis using a ecosystem diagnostic and treatment model, which is basically a fish production model. The report bluntly states in its conclusion that coho salmon have the greatest risk of extirpation given recent patterns of production observed in the subbasin. The modeling results presented in this report support this conclusion. Without some form of major interventions in the subbasin to restore watershed processes and habitats, we expect coho salmon to be extirpated from the subbasin sometime in the next 20 years. Clearly, if we're going to have fish We have to have water in the river, and there is some minimum level of water that needs to be there. If the agricultural community rejects these minimal in-stream flows, what's your alternative? What are the flows that are appropriate for fish in the Scott River? Surely it's not to leave the Scott River to go bone dry every year. This region is currently locked in the most severe drought we've seen in 1,200 years. We're in the worst drought we have seen in this region in 1,200 years. You'd never know it looking at the hay production in Scott Valley. It doesn't matter how much it rains, the hay production in Scott Valley remains pretty darn constant, and the number of acres in production remains pretty darn constant, because you just go to the groundwater and just pump the hound out of the groundwater. It can't be this way. The amount of water we use, the amount of hay we grow, has to reflect the hydrology of the season, of the year that we're in. It just can't be this way. While everyone else in California, whether it's salmon fishermen, Native American fishermen, other farmers, everyone else has to tighten the belt during a drought, but not in Scott Valley. You grow the same amount of hay, whether it's a drought or whether it's dry or whether it's in the middle or whether it's wet. So we have to come up with a water management strategy where the water use reflects water availability. And we haven't done that yet. And it's unfair to everyone else, for the folks in the Scott, to act like there's never a drought and you grow the same amount of hay year in and year out. It's made you disaster capitalists. When everyone else has to shut off their water and the price of hay skyrockets, folks in the Scott Valley benefit from that. You're exploiting a crisis, and you make more money during these droughts than you would in other year types. It cannot continue this way if we're going to have fish.
Thank you, Craig. Up next, we have Sari Summerstrom. You should have permission and should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm Sari Sommerstrom. I'm a retired watershed consultant, having worked in the Scott River watershed since 1989 on a lot of fish and habitat restoration efforts. I feel caught in the middle here because I care passionately about fish and I care passionately about our community. And I've been trying for 30 plus years to find that balance. And so I am disturbed when the balance gets totally thrown out of kilter for often the wrong information. I would like to talk about, just like the Water Master has cited here, we need to talk about strategic timing and strategic location. Not all stream reaches are created equal for good reason. And so we need to be able to have the data to match up our expectations with reality. Constantly referring to the section of the river that does tend to go dry in dry years, and pointing to that as the reason we don't have Chinook or Coho is not correct. We do need good monitoring information, which has been failing for the last couple of years of finding out where the Coho spawners are located. That's lack of funding. And if we're trying to match up water with fish needs, then we need those surveys. And I am pointing the finger at CDFW and the fish agencies that need to fund this, because you're what we call sometimes the WAGs type of approach, which is wild ass guess, when you're trying to figure out where the fish need water and we don't even know where the Coho spawned. But the 2020 brood year did very well. A second highest number, 1,766 fish came into the Scott, and a record number of outmigrants, just as Joe had pointed out. We do know how to manage fish. We've got good freshwater habitat that the Coho are doing well. There's so many issues to address here and so much misinformation. I was intimately involved with the 2013-14 Coho brood year experience and the fish rescue and what happened well and what happened, why did that Coho brood year fail? It's not being reported correctly. We need to get onto the facts. I support Joe's idea of a coordination group for each watershed, but we need more than the entities that he listed there. I am concerned about rushing to readoption of this schedule by your June 21st deadline. We need much more discussion on that. We are so far apart, and you're going to lock in these numbers once again without the right data before us and the right understanding of what these numbers mean. There's certain parts of the existing curtailment that are tolerable, that we can live with, and there are other parts that we cannot live with here. So please, we need reason and not misinformation and misunderstanding. So I do plead with the agencies to help us come to better understanding.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Up next, we have Dave Webb, followed by Sheila, and then and then Jack Rice. I see your hand raised too, so we'll do those three, and then if there are no more, I guess, new commenters, we'll circle back with Theodora. Okay. So Dave Webb, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Water Board staff and any Water Board members present. I really want to thank you for the efforts you've put in to date on trying to rebalance the use of water in the Shasta and Scott Valleys. I do have a couple of observations. First, a broadly set minimum flow at the mouth of the river is essential to preserving overall river function. But flow at the mouth alone fails to reliably address the groundwater component that is essential for maintaining river temperature and water quality. And including measures to involve groundwater usage is also essentially to fairly sharing the burden that's going to be placed on the water users within the valleys. In the Shasta River, the SPU gauge at River Mile 31 really needs to be incorporated into the curtailment planning, since it effectively measures the bulk of groundwater discharge into the Shasta River, particularly in mid to late summer, when tributary flows are essentially gone due to other diversions. At the same time, we really need the Water Board to up the ante against the scofflaws who continue to ignore the curtailment orders and continue to truck water to illegal pot growers and to irrigation districts that are claiming that their water usage from near surface groundwater is having no effect on surface flows. We need to be sure that you know that it is essential that you go the distance to refute both those claims of no impact and against those persons who are going to poison the well for those persons who are otherwise willing to be legal. We need to recognize that an abundance of money has been available for water-related ranch improvements since 1991. And persons who have chosen not to invest in upgrading their stock watering or irrigation systems from pre-ancient Egyptian technology really have no reason to complain now. I would like to suggest that stock water diversions that will be allowed to resume during high flows be also required to be screened under those conditions. I think we need to recognize also that there really isn't enough water to even meet all water demand, even in normal years. And it's time for the Water Resources Control Board to focus on retiring water rights that either cannot be regularly filled or which include so much fixed overhead that they're economically unviable. Irrigating at a financial loss should be recognized as waste and unreasonable use of water. I know it's hard for people who have become accustomed to taking 95% of the water from the Shasta at times and more than 100% of the surface flow in the Scott to get used to suddenly sharing on a more equitable basis. But it's time that we recognize that it has been unfair for way too long. And those of us who value the public trust surface water flows also have a right to water. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next, we have Sheila. Sheila, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
You can.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, for your comment regarding the pot growers in our region. And that was one of my comments that I wanted to make, is that this is not only a water issue, but an environmental concern. And the illegal taking of water is a major concern in our area. We're in the Shasta Valley district here, the Montague Water Conservation District. My husband and I are 5th generation ranchers, and so this is of great concern to us. One of the things I wanted to point out is that there should be some monitoring and studying done on the baby salmon as they migrate down to the Klamath River and die during that trip from diseases on their journey. And to the mouth of the river. And the polychaete worms are not found in the Scott and Shasta, but in the Klamath, preventing better return numbers to the Shasta and Scott. So I wanted to make that point. And I also wanted to make a point about at the Klamath River when it flows into the ocean, about what kind of monitoring is done for the fishing that is being done in that area, and if it's being monitored and is it being done in a legal manner. I want to voice my support of the comments provided by Sherry Salmon and also Theodora Johnson, as we're a cow-calf operation along with them, and this is of concern to us. I also wanted to comment on that because one of our ranches borders on the Shasta River. My husband has been a good steward and has worked with the different agencies in the past to improve the water and ecology along the Shasta River. I think that probably takes care of most of my comments, but I think there needs to be more input and more organizations coming together to hear all the aspects of people that are going to be affected by this. And I am against this present re-adoption of the drought emergency regulation as it presently stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, for your comments. Next, we have Jack Rice, followed by phone number ending in 575. So Jack, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. This is Jack Rice. I work with a number of landowners in Scott and Shasta Valleys and with the Siskiyou County Farm Bureau on these issues and water issues. So I appreciate the information that's been provided about the proposed readoption, particularly some of the concepts that have been brought up by the State Water Board as well as Department of Fish and Wildlife. I think it shows that they're paying attention to how the regulation has been implemented and have identified areas, some changes that are interesting to talk about. And well, everyone knows this is extremely challenging. It's important to find solutions that will protect the fish, and it has real world and major impacts for the farmers as well. And it's just hard to navigate. So we appreciate that people are considering that. Another initial point is I was intrigued by the information Mr. Coteau provided regarding migration monitoring. I think that the fish numbers and the returns certainly should be informative about the effect of flows, particularly since there was some connection with the summer flows prior to the curtailments being adopted. So I'm thankful that they provided that, and I look forward to better understanding how that what that connection is. I think that using those out migrant numbers are something that is important to helping the water user community better understand where the targets are and whether those are right or can be modified. And we've seen that in some instances modifications have been proposed. So thank you for that. One other topic to mention is the concept of recharge. I think that was alluded to by the State Water Board, is that there may be opportunities to do that. And Mr. Coteau as well mentioned that. And I think that's really important. The discussion has been reflected in the historic use about stock water rights among some of the water users, reflecting just how important that is to the hydrology. And I think that it is important for the regulation to, if it is readopted, to accommodate that and provide a practical opportunity to do recharge when those flows would be appropriate to do so. With that, thank you very much for this chance, and we look forward to better understanding the specific changes as they're developed.
Thank you, Jack. Up next, we have someone with the phone number ending in 575. You should be able to unmute yourself now by pressing *6. I see that you are unmuted, but I am unable to hear any audio. I'm not sure if you're also muted on your
How about
phone.
now?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear
How about
you.
now?
We can hear you.
Very good. Good afternoon. This is Jim Morris. I am a rancher in Scott Valley. We produce hay and livestock and seed crops. I would like to address today the idea of storage of water in the Scott River system. Historically, water was stored in the Scott in the form of snow, and we just don't seem to be getting those same snowfall events or the depth of snow or it lasting as long into the year as it historically did. It seemed like when it did that there was water for fish and for farming. I believe that we can remedy this if we would look at other forms of storage or even slowing the water down. For the last about 7 or 8 years, we've been doing research on groundwater recharge on our ranch with the idea that water could be taken out of the river during higher flows and reintroduced into the river later in the season. We're not sure how all of this looks yet at this point, but we're doing ongoing research with the assistance of UC Davis and others, and we would like to continue that research. We would ask that decision makers at any level that can help us to do that would allow us to be able to come up with numbers that can prove or disprove whether or not groundwater recharge makes sense. The other thing I'd like to address really quick, respectfully to Craig Tucker, is the idea that we produce hay in dry years, and we should stop doing that. During the dry years is the time that we need to produce forage for my livestock and also for a statewide and region-wide industry on the West Coast. The idea that we would limit production of something that's vitally important during the time that it's vitally important doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think if there's any time to produce something, it's when the people need it. And like I say, there are communities up and down our state as well as our own that require these forages to maintain a healthy industry. So thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to discuss any of these issues with anybody at any time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. On my end, that does the list of folks that wanted to provide a comment. So we'll open it up back. I see Conrad Fisher, you'd like to provide a second comment. So I will open it to Theodora, and then we will go to Conrad. Give me a moment. So Theodora, if you would still like to or finish up your comment from earlier, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Sure, thanks. I had actually raised my hand for my friend Lauren, who wasn't able to get through on her phone, but then she did get through. But since you've given me the opportunity, I appreciate that. I just wanted to say that the cow-calf business is really, it's handed down from generation to generation because it's extremely hard to get into with the time and upfront costs that it takes to get established. And if we're forced to sell 30% of our herd, we're not likely to be able to make our ranch payment, my little family. And we all feed hay in the winter, but we can't afford to feed hay beyond that, especially as the short supply of local hay will jack the price up. So we're really talking about the end of our business and our way of life if we can't change these regulations. So thanks for letting me jump in again.
Thank you, Theodora. Up next, we have Conrad Fisher, and then that's the rest of the folks on the list. So if anybody wants to make a second comment, feel free to raise your hand. And Conrad, you should have ability to unmute. It does.
This is more of question than comment. So if the agencies feel like answering, that would be great. One is to the water master and the other is to the water board. Water masters have long held the position that it is not their duty to uphold any law of the laws, any existing laws, except what's in the adjudication. And I've heard multiple water masters assert this legal opinion, but every time I ask, where do you get this? On what grounds are you exempt from all other laws? I never get an answer. So if somebody on this call has that answer, I'd love to hear it. If a water master doesn't, I'd love for you to go get it and find the answer. And then I guess that's it. I'll just end it there. Well, yeah, I guess with the water board, I guess my question would be, why do you continue to say that what you're doing is not setting the stage for permanent in-stream flow requirements? I think that's misleading the ag community. The ag community needs to accept that eventually water has been over allocated. We need to use less. So I don't think it's helpful. So I guess I would ask why you keep saying that and if you would consider knocking it off or stopping it. So thank you.
Thank you, Conrad, for your comments and questions. I guess last call, if there's anyone, we do have time for maybe one more comment before we wrap up. See, someone has a hand raised, but for some reason it's not coming. Oh, there it is. Ginger Smito. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. My name is Ginger Smito and I lived out in Big Springs. And I know there's been a couple of comments on the illegal cannabis operations out here taking the water. As you're all are aware of the SWRCB determination, there is a groundwater to surface water interaction in this valley. And I watch from my house and have taken numerous photos on a daily manner of at least 40 trucks per day that goes by my house have 3,500 gallons, and that's 140,000 gallons a day, all to illegal grows. I just was made aware that Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department is being cut by $1.2 million. So now that puts another hampering on the stopping of the water trucks to illegal cannabis operations, which then threatens more the water that will not get to the Shasta River. I truly think that the agencies that are on this call needs to step up and help stop the water from going to the illegal cannabis operations so that the farmers, the fish, and every dependent beneficiary of this resource is not inhibited. And it's going to be crucial this year. And you've got to step up. You've got to step up. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Okay. So I think that concludes our public comment period. So I just want to conclude today's meeting with a very big thank you to everyone on this call for joining us today and for providing your comments either verbally or through writing via email. We do appreciate if you provided a verbal comment. If you wanted to follow up and provide your comments in writing, you can email us at scottshasta.waterboards.ca.gov. So staff will be considering the information that you provided while developing an updated draft regulation that will be released for public comment later this month. We are anticipating holding another public meeting on this on May 25th, at which board staff will provide an overview of the proposed updates to the regulation and solicit comments. I will ask if we could share the presentation on slide 29. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, a copy of this presentation and the slide deck will be posted to the Scott Shasta Drought website later this week. We'll get it up there as soon as we can. And as you can see on this slide, some information about how to stay informed. We do encourage everyone to sign up for the Scott Shasta email subscription list. As noted on this slide, subscribing to this list means that you will be notified of upcoming meetings related to this process, including when the draft regulation is released. So if you're interested, please subscribe. And again, thank you so much for spending your time here with us today, for providing your comments, and thank you in advance for your continued engagement in this process. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thanks all.